Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And I do believe we are here. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. And you know, we try and represent as many continents as we can, and we also try and condense all the teaching as best as we can. But it's a challenge, and as such, we try and configure it in such a way that even the mature students can benefit from different ways of explaining it to the new students, and for the new students to at least to be able to come in and make some kind of semblance as to what's going on. This is the Keshe Foundation American Knowledge Team meeting in 2024. And as such, we would like to welcome everyone to the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. Yes, we are proceeding into the advanced transmutation. Today's subject is the Z-axis sphere. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is November the 17th of 2024. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. And please understand that there are many knowledge seekers around the world in their native language and in their own way doing the same thing. And so please support everyone, because we're all on the same team. So last week we terminated the intermediate transmutation sessions, and we went through the y-axis sphere, the covalent bonding. We discussed tensity, mathematics, registration, and the twinity of life. And so we move on to the advanced transmutation, but please understand, this is all still very basic teaching, and it's a matter of adding to the knowledge in such a way that we can have a dialogue, because there's a language that is specific not only to science, but also to plasma science. And so we need to transcend all of that knowledge and try and work it together so that we can get off this hesitancy highway. And are we still stuck on that highway? Yes, we are. We're in the lowest energy state, and we like it. And of course, we like to fudge a lot of things. And so what they say is, when you sweep it under the carpet, nobody knows. Well, the thing is, you know. If you swept it under the carpet, you know. And as such, there's nothing to sweep under the carpet. What we need to do is we need to search for outer space and lay a nice clean carpet to the plasma highway, to our pie in the sky. But is that what we want? We just want that little pie in the sky. And why do we just want that little pie? And as Marin Tavakoli Keshe has laid out in his 3 books, starting with book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter, where we bring together the matter state, the dark matter, and the antimatter, and discuss that and how that is the universal order of creation. And this creation leads to another creation, and there's a connection. As in book number 2, we see the structure of the light. And so if there's a connection, then there must be some kind of way of communicating between those two. And then, how does one become two? And so that leads us to looking what happened in the beginning. So we see that the neutron came before the atom, and it also came before the PM tick, because from the division of the neutron into the electron-proton combination, we created a PM tick. And so that was discussed in book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. And so where one begets two. And so this is how things grow. And we need to grow as well. It's something we do every day, whether we want to or not. It's not a matter of a choice. It's already been made for us. We just have to realize that this is an ongoing process. And this planet is going through a growth stage as well. And since we are on this planet, we've tried for 352 weeks with the Universal Council and Rick Raman to bring one nation, one planet, one race for justice and world peace together. And this isn't a form of total domination. It's a matter of respect. It's to understand that this planet has a dignity and that we have a responsibility to uphold that dignity, because when we have visitors, we want to be able to graciously be hosts. And you don't want to bring people into a messy house, do you? And so there are some guidelines that we needed to follow, and we found that the 10 Commandments were kind of the basic 10 Commandments. We weren't really sure if those were the true commandments or the original commandments, and yours truly has always had doubts about that. So it's quite a revelation to find out there were another 14 commandments that were missing. And so, we all have selective knowledge, we all have selective memory, and the reason for that is because it's selective to our convenience. Well, our convenience is part of the whole package, you see, because if we're trying to get on the plasma highway, that includes everything. And there's an interesting thing about everything. Everything is part of everything. So that means there's nothing left behind. And since the Creator created everything, then did the Creator create something that was worthless? Well, one of those things he created was free will. And so here we are groveling on the transmission highway, where we have frequency, pressure, and temperature. And of course, we have physicality. And actually, it's very welcome, and it's very nice. It's fun. But of course, it can be terrorizing. It can be hurtful. And it can sure get ugly. And so we didn't come ugly, and we didn't come to a place that was ugly. So what happened? And this is what we had to discover as we get into the transition highway. We have to see that in order to elevate our understanding, we have to understand where we came from. And is that the only connection that we have? And if we say a connection to what? So what are the opportunities? What are the parameters? And so we start to realize that most of us have gone through life fearful to even ask those questions, okay? Because first of all, most don't want to answer that question. And those who position themselves in the position of knowledge and power, they don't want to tell you for some reason. And it's kind of strange because they're part of humanity as well. And so why would they be so counterproductive? So that's the limitation to getting on the transmutation highway. But we're starting to see the pattern. We're starting to see the way, and we're starting to see how things can be done. So we now see that this pie that we're striving to get is actually just a small piece of the pie. And the reason it's such a small piece is because we're prejudiced. And so when we look at the pie chart of prejudice, we see that it's the speed of light that limits the transmission, isn't it? But the speed of light has its own characteristic of variable transition. And so where is the bridge? Are we disconnected from the source? And how far is that source? And you can say, well, the source is the universe that is light years away. Well, can we have another piece of the pie, maybe? Or how about just another pie? Wouldn't that be nice? Why are we always, fed the same thing? Can we have a little variety? So we identify our limitations, and this is kind of the key. And if we understand in science what the limitations are, well, field density is one of the limitations. Field tensity is another limitation. Field mass is another limitation, which includes discrimination. And then, of course, there's the field MAGRAV relationship, which not only discriminates as to what you are, but where you are. And then this keeps you within an energy dimension. But they're interdimensional energy fields. And so this is the new revelation that we have. So when we're looking at understanding the spheres, and we're talking about the z-axis sphere now, we have always been talking about surface to volume ratios because this is how it demonstrates the transfer of energy. And so we said the 1 and 1 is more than 2. And the reason for that is because the 1 and 1 are the feeding dimensions and the 2 is the feedback dimension. But remember that we still have the 1 and 1. So altogether, they make up 3 feedback dimensions. So the feeding dimension also becomes a feedback dimension, doesn't it? Because you're not walking around with a feedback, are you? You maybe have a breakfast, and then you stop eating, and then maybe you have lunch, and then you stop eating, and then maybe you have supper, and then you stop eating. And so in order to start and stop, you have to have a feedback. And so this is the point. And then from that feedback, you can be the observer and decide your course. And when you don't understand it, then this is where the pie comes in, a little 3 and a bit. So we just kind of round it off and fudge it. And we say, well, that's our world. And we're sticking to that story. And that's all we want to know. So don't ask anymore. And so we become the observer fudger. And that kind of contributes to part of the problems here, because as the observer, we have to understand that we are also the participant. So as a participant, if we are the fudger, then that means the environment that we have is not true, because the environment is within our like beauty, within our beholding. So how you perceive the environment is your viewpoint. And as a result, then you facilitate a manifestation cause. And so this manifestation cause is variable. because you can change it as a participant, you can change it as a fudger, and you can change it with your environment. And so this becomes important to understand because it adds to the variability. So we're trying to make relationship choices, and we say, well, what are all the choices? So one of the choices is the energy state that you work on. So we have gone through a process where we identified the X, Y, and Z axis as part of the transmission. And then we wanted to elevate ourselves into another dimension. We found that we have to have an X, Y, and Z axis transition. And then we see that we have a duality. And from that duality, we can go into transmutation. And so we've been discussing the X and Y axis, but today we're going to discuss the Z axis. And that's not part of the transmission, that's part of the transmutation. And so we have a range of relationship choices: transmission, transition, and transmutation. And these are all the medium, none of which is the message. So when we're looking at the involvement of energy, and as a Keshe Foundation, we have shown how we can deliver electrical energy, battery energy, plasma energy, how we can deliver various gases such as methane, hydrogen, carbon dioxide. So what we see is that there are different energy states. And what we have to understand is that the physical state, which is our dominant state, is part of the convergence matter. Well, if it's a convergence, then that matter has to come from somewhere. And so that is what we refer to as the matter state. And that matter state is part of what we call the transition matter, because that transition matter is also part of the convergence matter of bringing in the plasma state. And the plasma state is delivered through the principal matter. And so when we combine the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter, we get what we call a mag-grav positioning. And from that mag-grav positioning, we can choose to either be in the plasma state, the matter state, or the physical state. And what is most notable is that all three of these states are capable within our physical state. So we don't have to leave our physical state to experience these other states. And yet, while we're talking about transmutation, which is exclusively in the plasma state, so now we have to figure out when is the transmutation state part of the physical state, and when is the transmutation state part of the plasma state. So we look at the various dimensions, and as we said, so there's transmission, transition, and transmutation. And so these are different energy levels. And as a result of how these energy levels are maintained, contained, and manifest, then we find that they have different field strengths. And so as such, when they have different field strengths, they also have different dimensions. And so we can see a transmission dimension, a transition dimension, and a transmutation dimension. And then, of course, there's a connection in between. So if we review and we see that with respect to the z-axis sphere, and we say, well, there's a physical state, so that's part of the convergence matter, and that becomes a transmission dimension. But if we go to a higher energy state, the matter state, that becomes the transition matter. So this becomes the transition dimension. But this transition dimension is also another transmission state. And if we go to a higher still, the plasma state, which is the principal matter, this becomes a transmutation dimension. And it too is a transmission state. So when we talk about these various states, we have to see the relationship. And the thing is, there's always a balance. There's a magnetical gravitational balance. We call it a maggrav. And so scientifically speaking, there's a conservation of magnetical fields and there's a conservation of energy. And there's a balance. But in the spiritual community, there's a balance between the spirit and the soul. And so there has to be a balance there. And do we know what we're talking about? And then we look at the plasma science, and it too has to maintain a maggrav balance. So it adds to the knowledge and it brings together both scientific communities, the physical science and the spiritual science. And so this all becomes part of the conservation of susceptibility. So we have independent plasmatic variables in each of these fields. And so there's a balance on one side and a balance on the other side. And so there's a susceptibility on one side and a susceptibility on the other side. And these have to work together in order to maintain this balance. So it's not a singularity, it's now a duality with two sides of the coin. But when we look at the plasmagen state dependency, we see that the mattergen is a two-way street of equality. And so what does it mean by equal? And if we look at the different energy states, say, for instance, we have the atomic state, the nanostate, or the GAN state, so we can say that the one side in the GAN state is equal to the other side in the GAN state, and likewise on the nanostate, and likewise on the atomic state. But what happens if we go from state to state? Do we still have this equality? Well, yes, of course we do, because there are transfer states. These are in between dimension states. And so we understand that each state, like a transmission dimension state or a transition dimension state or a transmutation dimension state, is affected by a transfer dimension state. And so that's in between. And so what it takes is whatever the dimension that you're operating in. And so we say the X, Y, and Z axis is part of the transmission. And X, Y, and Z axis are part of the dimension of the transmission. And so we could take that transmission dimension and run it through a transfer state, and we could go to a transition matter, or we can go to a transmutation matter via another transition matter. And there's no rule that says you can only go one step at a time. So we basically are seeing that we can actually transcend two transfer states if we want. And additionally, what we have to understand, at the risk of complicating everything, is to understand that one of the dimensions of the transmission dimensions, for instance, let's say the x-axis, could actually go through a transfer state dimension and become part of a transition matter, or could in fact go to a transmutation state through another transition matter, or it could be the y-axis, or it could be the z-axis, or it could be a combination of. So now we can start to understand, how come we have such a variety? How come there are 8 billion souls on this planet, all have the common denominator? Earth is our home. But did we all come from the same place? Or Earth is our common home at this time, at this point, at this transition point? So we could have all come from different places. And one thing we know for sure is that when we leave, we're going to different places. And so what is the criteria for that? And so we go through life without answering that question. Is that acceptable to you? Or do we have to apply that answer and understand that we have to not look at today's home? Because if you are a traveler, and let's say this is the North American knowledge team meeting, and let's say you want to go to Europe and you stay there for a month. And so you will have to stay somewhere. Wherever you stay, that'll be home. And you say, well, where's home? Well, this is my home. This is where I am. No, 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 no. Where's your original home? Oh, the original home. Yes, yes. I thought you were just asking where my home is in Europe. No, my home is in North America. Oh, I see. Well, ask that question again. Where is your home? Oh, yes, my home is in North America. Oh, you were born in North America? Yes. And where were you born from? Where was your original home? Well, why do you want to know that? Are you prejudiced? And so we find that, yes, we are prejudiced. Why are we prejudiced? Because we don't understand that the earth is our home, and that's the common denominator because we all chose to come here. We didn't choose to go to Mars. Why? Because we are, very easy to work with. We like beauty. We like nice things. We like heaven. And to us, earth is heaven. And so we came to heaven. So why are we making such a mess? And this becomes the question. So as knowledge seekers, we need to seek the answer. And so we have to understand how we got here, but there are many examples. So do we have to go into outer space to see that? Well, we've already discussed that. We can do this right here on planet Earth. And so we did that with the cups of life. And this was very, very important because they weren't the cups of the pandemic. They were the cups that represented our inner space, our emotional strength. And our emotional strength had manifested itself into physical strength as well. And so we were introduced in the nanocoding process of the monatomic science. And in that process, we created a GANS. And we saw that there were two different cups, the emotional cup and the physical cup. And one produced the zinc GANS and one produced the copper GANS. And together, they were the cups of man. Together. This is a key point. And then we had the twin cup connections. And so what we found was that these are two emotional cups because we used the emotional cup configuration and we connected them together. And so we had the twinity. And as a result, we were able to also create other GANSs just using these procedures. And so we were familiar with the basic GANSs, as this is a basic teaching: carbon dioxide, calcium, zinc, copper, amino acid, and water. And then, of course, we've been introduced to exotic GANSs like gold and radioactive GANSs. And then we find that, well, wait a second, there's a lot more than just the GANSs that we produced. There are many Earth GANSs. And so we realize that these Earth GANSs represent, and we're talking about prejudice, the periodic table of prejudice, where we have all the details of our Earth space as we've seen on the table of elements. And so each one has a characteristic, each one has a mass, and so they have a relationship and they work together. And how do we know they work together? Because all of them are on this planet. And in fact, because we are members of this planet as well, we have a representation of all these elements within us as well. Because these details have to be friendly to us. Remember, we came to heaven. So the manifestation of the matter plasma dimensions even went so far as physicality. And so we understand that the physicality you can touch and see, but there's the plasmatic reality which you can't touch and you can't see, but there's a nearness to it, and it still becomes part of the matter plasma. And as such, it becomes part of our feedback system. And man is feedback dominant. Because what we see and what we accept is our physicality. But our physicality has a nearness and proximity to the plasmatic reality as well. And so when it's neighborly like that, it's still part of the matter plasma dimension. Remember, we are now in the 3 dimensions of transmutation. And so as such, when we're looking at the principal matter interaction, we see that the energy in the universe comes as an energy pack. But that energy pack could have different flavors. So those flavors need to be put in a package into a parcel. And so that energy parceling unit could have a lot of things that would be favorable for us. And they don't all come from the one direction. And even if they did come from the one direction, there still wouldn't be the same flavor because energy is constantly in motion. So the path that you come by, you could be coming by the same street, but you certainly won't be coming with the same traffic. And so the traffic becomes part of the flavoring, if you will, of the trip. And so if we understand that analogy, and we understand that there's many ways to come to the source, so then we can see that this is where the variety comes in. So does it mean all or none? Well, obviously not, because all of us have a common denominator, but all of us have more than just that common denominator. And that common denominator allows us to manifest on this planet. And this planet is constantly evolving. So our affinity to this planet is also has to constantly be evolving. So this is not a choice that we have. This is part of our existence. So the energy gets absorbed and the energy gets emitted, and we become part of that process. And the planet becomes part of that process. And so all of us collectively become part of that process. And since energy cannot be grabbed onto, it can only be as part of a containment. So when we see the Gans, we see that the Gans is contained, for instance, in this picture, within a glass or within a carafe. And you can see that the field is beginning to rotate. And on the right-hand side of the picture, there's a hole in the Gans. And so what we have is air. Inside that air is a flask made of glass. Inside that flask is water. Inside that water is Gans. And inside that Gans is a hole. And so we see these overlapping fields. And some are physical and some are plasmatic. And there is a balance. And so we can see that there's a balance between the physicality and the plasma reality. And so, of course, there's that in-between state, the matter state. And so when we're looking at the susceptibility of what is and what isn't, then we have to understand that something is always something and nothing is nothing. So something is always something as opposed to being something else. And so what is the criteria for doing that? Well, one of the things that has to do with the environment. And so, as has been shown, where we have a rotating Gans field within a cup, and this was shown publicly as a claim to a threatening atomic structure on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is something that I did in my home. And it's not nuclear and it's not threatening, but there's a hole in my Gans. And on the right-hand side, there's actually another Gans in the hole in the Gans. So in fact, the Gans is within the cup, and there's a hole in the Gans, and a Gans in that hole. And it all seems to be so very neat. And this is part of the rotating Gans. So we have to understand that in a liquid, we can see that there's a dynamic reactor that is growing. So that energy has come in and changed the conformity of the Gans. But interestingly enough, when the water evaporates and we see the beautiful artwork of the crystalline formations of the salt Gans, what kind of skillful artist did that? Would you be able to recreate that? Would you like me to go and get you a paint set and some brushes, canvas? Maybe you can do that on a 3D printer. Or maybe you just did it as a dynamic reactor growth. Isn't nature wonderful? So now we understand that there's a principal energy flow, and that energy is always in motion, and it's a two-way street. And so we say, well, the two-way transmission, and there's a two-way transition. But, we see the color of our planet is blue because we're the water planet. And so we emit what we are. And what we are is a manifestation of emotion. And so this becomes important to understand, and we're going to be talking about that in a lot more detail in the coming weeks. Because this principal interaction doesn't just restrict itself to the Earth, it includes the sun. The sun operates the same way. And so we find that there's a two-way emission of intention from the sun to the Earth and the Earth to the sun. And somehow, as the Earth is rotating around the sun, it seems to maintain a consistent path, and yet there's no string attached. And so we see that that is a covalent bonding connection. And it's very strong because it can hold the Earth within its orbit. But it's in balance because we stay within the orbit. So we don't come any closer, and we don't go any farther. Except that there is a relationship. And that relationship has to do with the interaction of energy. And so it's not the change in the orbit is the change in the mass. And the reason for that is because when energies come together, we like to think that it's a point of conflict. But in the plasma state, it becomes a point of resolution, a point of containment, a point of covalent bonding. So as the energy comes in and contributes to the mass, which means it contributes to the density, then yeah, that changes the range of our orbit. And so it's not a circular orbit, but rather a spiral. And for some reason, we see that as an energy binding, which is necessary because each of us has to have an energy binding to maintain our self-serving needs. But many choose to do this at the expense of others, violating the laws of conservation. And so those who are robbed then have the same problem, because now they want to do the energy binding, but there's a deficiency because someone stole it from them. So either they expend more energy to get it back, or they resort to stealing it from someone else. And so the domino effect carries on. And this is what we're having a problem with. So this has led to our confusion, where we don't understand the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And so when we look at the advanced science, we see that they understand that, but it hasn't filtered down to our basic level. And so we have to understand that this conflict point becomes a point of containment, and it becomes a binding zone, and it develops a tensity. And so that tensity creates the containment. And within that containment, each binding zone has a mass. And so that maintains the distance, the nearness, and proximity. And so we can have the Z-axis sphere, which is really a conservation of susceptibility. So we've been talking about containment. And when we look at the containment of man, our containment is within our skin. So what is the content of that containment? And that content, of course, is inside the containment. And inside the skin of the body, well, we see the gans. Well, what's inside the containment of a stone? Well, there's a difference, because inside the stone is more stone. And what about the containment of a field? Well, there's a fence around the field. Well, what's that fence made of? Well, let's look at the Earth. What is the fence of the Earth? Well, we call that the Coulomb barrier. What about the fence of the plasma field? Well, we call that a plasma barrier. Well, what happens when we get into a field of non-containment? What is the containment then? And what is the content then? Well, that content consists of dimension states. And those dimension states are the medium. And the messages can travel on these dimensions. And so let's restate. We can travel on the individual X, Y, and Z axis. We can travel on the transmission, transition, or transmutation dimension. And we can travel on the transfer state dimensions in between. So really, we have to ask ourselves, which dimension? Well, who do we ask? So when we talk about the bonding, this is what bonds the various dimensions together. So in the lowest energy state, we have the atomic bonding. We learned about the monatomic bonding. We call that and we call the polyatomic bonding. And then we call it energetic bonding. Where does creative come in? If we're so creative and we don't understand it, maybe this is why we're proud of our creative of destruction. So how do we achieve this conservation? And so we have to look at the range. It could be point to point, a dimension to dimension, axis to axis, energy state to energy state, field to field, matter to matter, even plasma to plasma. And so this is all part of the greater oneness. And to understand the greater oneness, of which we are one part, we have to understand the plasma conservation. So the plasma conservation can go from matter to plasma. We call that creation. Or it can go from plasma to matter. We call that decay. Or it can go from matter to plasma and back to matter. We call that transmutation. And so this curvature that we're having, in the extreme, it's a folding. It doesn't have to be a completely flat folded crease. There can be a bending. And so this becomes very important when we look at the difference between what we call the animate and the inanimate world. So to create protein, that needs folding, where a polymer doesn't, it's linear. But linear is in 2 dimensions, and we're gone into 3 dimensions now discussing how we take a pattern template like this and we coil it and we add a curve to it, where we take those 2 dimensions and put a gentle curve in it to give it a form. And so we create a pattern template, and this pattern template becomes a spiral growth. And so you can see the coil. That is the energy that is applied to the pattern template to give it that spiral growth. And then to go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, you have to have gentle curves to create a form. And that form is the containment. And that coiling can then continue. And as it continues, it creates a tubular form artifact. And so, of course, we can see that that tubular form can manifest itself in various different forms. So from these 2 dimensions with the gentle curves, we have a containment and a tubular coiling. and we see the energy pattern that is manifested. This is the manifestation cause that we're talking about. But within us, we're organic beings. And so organic beings have a carbon connection. And the energy that comes and goes is the hydrogen. And so if we're going to maintain this in a linear form, then we have to have polar opposites. We have to have polar flipping. And in the process of flipping these poles, well, we kind of create this spiral. And so when we look at the basic DNA on its own, and we see that not only do we create a spiral, but we create a double spiral. We call it the double helix. And then there's a connection between them. And that connection changes as the spiral moves. And so the basic DNA is connected to the basic RNA, and it too is a spiral. And so that works kind of in the same way. And so the DNA and the RNA is kind of the blueprint, the template, if you will, for our existence. So when we look at the DNA spiral, to create the spiral, you have this rotating or twisting or coiling and have it grow. And so the question that, we need to ask, is the DNA rotating within its position? Or is it static? Since it's not in a physical state, in the GAN state, it doesn't have the limitation that a crystalline structure would have in the physicality. So it must be free turning. So when we look at the result, we see the DNA spiral, the tubular form, and the coiling. And not only does it grow, but it has to grow in 3 dimensions. We have a spherical growth. So we have a twisting, we have a rotating, we have a coiling. And so we see how the soul of the mind has a problem, because we have 2 minds, a left and right hemisphere. And we ask ourselves, are we in 2 camps? Because somehow these 2 hemispheres of the brain cross over into the body, and they work totally differently. When I say totally differently, the blood, which carries the emotion, travels within the body, but it travels around the brain. And so to be able to convert in that methodology, it has to rotate, it has to twist, it has to coil. Because it's constantly in motion. It never stops. So you have to create a field. So with our minds, we may be too tense. Or with our emotion, we may be too intense. And so when we look at the plasma reactors, we've seen this very thing. We've seen the physically rotating balls with the physical GANs inside. And we created the physical matter state, the GAN state. but we also created the plasma state and the dynamic plasma state. So each ball had a plasma field around it. But in the star formation, all four balls created a dynamic plasma in the core. There were no physical balls, and there was no rotating GANs. And so this becomes a star formation of life, as you can see, where we have the gravitational physicality and we have the plasmatic reality, the other part of the duality. But each part of the duality is in 3 dimensions. It's in a spherical state. And so these spherical fields are plasma fields and they're overlapping. And these fields are all part of the GANS manifestation. So either we can create the GANs or they get created from the GANs. Each one is a maggrav. And there's a covalent bonding. And these fields are the registration books that tell you where you came from, where you're going, what are you doing. And so since there's a travel involved, then you have to have interacting spheres. And so in simplistic terms, we have a polar point of view where the North Pole is connected to the South Pole, and conversely, the South Pole connected to the North Pole. And so this all becomes part of the maggrav energy transfer state. And when we see these interacting spheres, there has to be a balance. And that balance is not only a point of view, but it has to have a mass balance. Mass is in a plasmatic state. Weight is in a physical state. Mass is in a point of containment. And so as we understand our point of containment, and as we understand that there's a folding, there's a curvature, and we see that there's a nonlinear twinity. And in order to transcend the various levels, we have to maintain a balance. So a balance not only from one dimension to another, but from one field strength to another, from one energy state to another. And so the twinity of life is a physical inertia field of connection. And so that's what we are as well, because we have a twinity. We have the plasmatic connection of our souls and the physical connection of our body within the containment of our skin. So the soul of the mind is actually a product of the soul of the earth and the soul of the man. If that is a feedback condition. But the soul of the mind is a feeder to the soul of the earth and the soul of the man. And manifests the soul of physicality. From there, we have the physicality of man. But the physicality of man cannot manifest until we have the physicality of the earth. And so this is what we have to understand. There has to be a point of containment. And we can operate within that point of containment. And so the boundary layer, the skin, if you will, of the soul of the man and the soul of the mind is a supragranular layer, which is purely plasmatic within the skull, within the containment of the blood that circulates around the brain. And within is what we call the gray matter, the brain itself, of which the major component is the calcium GANs. So we're starting to see how things work. So we talked about the MAGRAV state, how it went to the nano state, the monatomic level, the GAN state, the polyatomic level, the plasma state, that being the field state. And as we say, these are all fields of containment. Well, what happens if we go one step beyond into the non-containment? And what about on the other side? Are we stuck with the Coulomb barrier, or what happens there? How do we maintain that balance? Well, obviously, we have to transcend that as well, don't we? And so we discovered this in the Sanya conference because we were able to produce gold GANs there, among other things, and introduce the world to the new plasma technology, which took into consideration the laws of conservation. So as we understand it in basic physics, the path link and susceptibility, where the magnetical forces of the emission of attention are balanced out by the gravitational field forces by the emission of retention. And so this interaction creates the emission of the intention, and that affects the nearness and proximity. So the covalent bonding of fields is contained within their tensity and mass, as we said. But you see, the registration is of the wishes of the creator. And so where do we fit in? And if we're in the vision, the plasma vision of the field of the creator, then we become the creator as well. And we too can go one step beyond, and not just in one direction, but in both directions. And so if we're going in both directions, when we talked about the y-axis transmutation dimension, and we've seen the pH of the twinity registration, now we have to move that x-axis, and we have to move that y-axis. And create the z-axis transmutation quadrants. So we have to take more into account. Understanding it's a two-way street, up and down and left and right. And so the transmutation becomes part of understanding the range transition, which transcends the z-axis transmutation dimensions. And the laws of conservation govern the covalent bonding attributes. But the containment requires a gravitational tensity and mass. But if there is no containment, then there is no tensity and there is no mass. What happens then? Well, the fundamental rule is that the soul of man cannot be abandoned. And as such, we have to understand that now we're in the post-March 15th of 2024 era of choices, where we have a new selection process. And that process will continue because, remember, the Earth space, that bountiful space, that beautiful space, we came from that transmutation space in outer space. And our existence is that graceful space of our inner space. And we have this gravitational conformation because of the hydrogen. We have a gravitational emission spectrum in color. It's a fingerprint. It's a specific emission. And that emission comes from the interaction between the field forces of the sun and the field forces of the earth. And the interaction point is magnetical, and it also interacts with the universe. And so those three magnetical forces come together and manifest this gravitational emission spectrum for the hydrogen. That is a gravitational confirmation. In addition, we have other cornerstones of science. They change in terms of mass, size, relationship. We have nano, pico, GaNs, plasma, soul. These are all channels for the emission of intention. The emission of intention becomes very, very important because this takes us from the non-visible speed of plasmatic rotation to the speed of visible transmission spectrums. So the surface superficiality of physicality is based on the internal substance of the plasma substrate, not the other way around, the way that we've been doing it. So we see in color the electromagnetic spectrum. That's, of course, our point of containment, but that containment is of the plasmatic interaction. So what we're looking at is the result of the magnetical balance between the gravitational and magnetical fields. And of course, not only within our frequency spectrum, but beyond as well. So when we look at the pH of the mag-graph, and we see that we had the physically rotating balls and we created the dynamic plasma state where there was no physicality and there was no containment. And yet it was within a containment field. So understand, we are part of the space technology. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. And so we see physical saucers. We also see partial spheres. We can even see full spheres. The Earth is one of them. We have a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere, and they rotate in opposite directions. And yet the Earth rotates in one direction. And if we take this sphere and stretch it, we can create a cylinder. A space cylinder. And if we bring all these technologies together and well, let's have a show, a space show. And this is one thing that we're going to have to get used to. The new space show. And not watch it in amazement and not watch it in fear, but watch it as a homecoming. Because we're all part of the peace process. There are many points in the field strength of the dove. And so we are continuing with the transmutation training sessions, the nutrition and wellness sessions, starting in November, carrying on to December and January. So please join us. And of course, we are proceeding with the new plasma research, the real advanced science. Join us there as well. And seek the greater oneness as we've been trying to for 564 knowledge seekers workshops. That's 564 weeks in a row. Presentations of Rick Raman and Maren Keshe. Not only to transcend the limitations of nuclear science, but to transcend the limitations of matter state nuclear science. To understand that we're going one step beyond. We are talking in the present. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, Teachings of Plasma Science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. So World Peace Treaty, sign it. Sign it with meaning. Sign it with intent. Sign it with your pen and display it proudly. And sign it with your soul if you haven't sold it. So we can ask, is man the reactor of a three-dimensional transcendent universe? We know there are no straight lines through the field transmutation. Well, can man go into outer space without a peace stone? And how can we transmute through the dimensions of history? So we look at the sphere creation because it combines the x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis dimensions. And so the partnerships of curves and beauty is what manifests the physical transmission dimensions. Yep, very simple. The plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace stone in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of the class, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you so much.
And thank you again, Alex, for presenting and sharing some deeper understanding with all of us. We can see if any of the participants has a question they'd like to ask or a clarification. If anyone would like to raise a point or add something to what Alex said, or take exception even to what he said, I think he's well versed to handle that. Anyone? I was thinking, Alex, maybe these research centers are getting set up for government officials like NASA and other officials who want to sort of move out of the black budgets and the rest of these and go into some sort of peaceful research in a way that will elevate humanity. I know the fees are quite expensive and you have to pay your own room and board. And for NASA or one of the other space agencies, so many tens of thousands a year is just a tiny drop. But for most of us, this seems at this point, unless we get a scholarship in a way, quite difficult to attend. But I think perhaps these research centers will get set up for world space scientists in a way. Again, just a guess. Any thoughts on that? This gets the nations cooperating and collaborating in the laboratory, let's say, as well as on the political end.
Open the mic. As I say, we all have to do some soul searching. Are we satisfied with the answers that we've gotten so far? Are we satisfied with the way, people conduct themselves on this planet? The conduct that we are seeing, was that part of our DNA? Was that part of our travel package? Or was that acquired? It's like a food. Let's say, for instance, comparing North American food with Chinese food. You have a preference? Is that part of your DNA or is that an acquired taste? So let's say, or an example for me, I live inland and I thought, I knew about seafood, but then I spent several weeks by the sea and I tasted seafood. When I came back inland, I couldn't eat seafood anymore because it didn't taste like seafood. So that was an acquired taste, wasn't it? And so our conduct is acquired that way as well. So if we are respectful, if we're respectful of the earth, then we need to be respectful of ourselves first. And so if we're not respectful of ourselves, then how can we be respectful of others? Forget about being respectful of Earth. And if that's what we are reduced to, then the question becomes, what are we doing exactly? Because, as that song goes, is that all there is? And it can't possibly be, can it? I mean, look at all the components that we have. Look at all the complexity. Look at all the elements. Look at all the diversity. Look at all the people. That was all created. Do we not have any respect for that creation? Do we feel that we are more equal than that which has created everything? It really boggles the mind if you think about it, because it doesn't make sense. So, as we say, something is always something as opposed to something else. And why is not the question, why is the answer? And so we have to, instead of banging our head against the wall, we have to understand that we are made of a plasma state. And that plasma state feeds our physical state. So that is the way it is. Accept it, enjoy it, and prosper in it. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, again, anyone would like to ask a question here? I think Alex is more than willing to try and answer or to share his understanding. I haven't come up with any real good questions for you, Alex, today, but I thought maybe some of the others would.
That's okay. It's a tough act to follow. Mr. Kesh is racing so far ahead. So, just rowing as fast as I can to try and keep up. But
Right, I'm sure you have no objections to taking a position in the new plasma ministry, perhaps in your country or around the world. I think this is where we're going to fit in more and more, perhaps, depending on what your specialty is and what you like. Maybe we'll become quite knowledgeable, more than we are now, in being able to explain this technology to the layman, who's going to have a lot of questions, more than we get into most of these sessions or even in the workshops, because as we know, it just doesn't seem to fit with us in a way. It does, but at the same time, again, changing the whole paradigm to realize we're just not physical creatures, that we have this energy dimension. And again, it's up to the individual to open it up and explore it for themselves. I don't think I can open up and operate in your energy dimension. I'm having enough issues just opening mine up and operating in that dimension. So there'll be a lot of questions. I think this is a very positive move to bring in sort of a Department of Plasma or Education or Department of Peace, interrelations with the ambassador to the universal community, perhaps. I know the Universal Council has a role in that, but there may be some more specific categories, again, for making GANs and the rest. So this is what I'm seeing or feeling as part of where we may fit in the future, if you so desire to be part of this new understanding of the plasma technology. They're going to need a lot of teachers and a lot of ministers, in a way, not religious, of course, but just people who hold positions and share the knowledge. Doing conferences, doing seminars, bringing it into university, perhaps debating professors, and so on and so forth. It's not going to be just like a shooty shoot where you just sail on down to the bottom without any interference, at least in the beginning, until it's more widely accepted. But we can have a lot of fun doing this.
Well, that's the important thing. You know, we have to have fun doing it because actually life is fun. So uh, one of the reasons we have to be serious about having fun is because there are many who are serious about not having fun, and so we have to balance that off. But you know, overall, it becomes kind of interesting to view the way life is if you were to say remove all the problems and one of the big problems, of course, is money. Uh, it it becomes a real problem if you don't have it. So it becomes the primary focus of the life. What happens if that primary focus dissipates? What would you do then? And then, you know, you realize that there are people who have all the money that they need, and for some reason, they don't seem very happy. They want to make more money. And so it kind of begs the question as to what is the purpose of having the money if the money doesn't bring you happiness? So I think it's not understanding the purpose of money. So one of the nice things about having money in our society is an equitable way of participating in the society. You know, you have a home, you have to buy it, you have food, you have to pay for it, and you want a service, you have to pay for it. You provide a service, you'd like to get paid for it. So there's a transactional benefit to that. And that benefit is actually very pleasant, except when it becomes a matter of existence. So in other words, if we don't have the money, we won't be able to pay the rent. And if we don't pay the rent, well, we're going to end up on the street. So then it becomes a matter of urgency. So that is not a very pleasurable thing. And so this is the thing that we have to understand that you know, it's our responsibility to take care of the life essentials, which are air, food, water, and shelter. And if we look around our life and see how are we taking care of that and how much respect we have for that, and we find that, well, we pass that responsibility onto someone else. And that's okay. It's nice to be dependent on someone else. But what happens when you're dependent on someone who's undependable? That causes stress. And not the kind of stress that is beneficial to you. So this is how the majority of people on this planet live. They live from day to day, not because the universe provides for them and they understand that, but because they can't plan beyond a day or two. The urgency of producing today what they need today is paramount. And even if you were to take a food and produce it in a short period of time, it may take a week. For some people, they don't have a week. A week is an eternity. So what happens if suddenly we don't have to worry about essentials like food and water and shelter? What happens if we learn how to enlist the services of the universe and have that provided for us. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be desirable? And that's what we're about.
Yeah, and there would be enough for a monthly stipend for everyone. If we moved away from war and became peaceful, that whole amount of $1 trillion, at least in the United States and many other countries, would be used. And then if you're feeding partially through the fields, the government can provide food stamps. Maybe they'd cut them in half and say, okay, half of the time you're going to go with the plasmatic feeding. Not only because it works, but it actually creates wellness within you. So there's so many ways. And again, if the energy is used according to the way it's made in the universe, then the energy bills will be so you may need only a few dollars to live in the future. But I know money will be there as long as we have the greed of the man. I think Mr. Kesh indicated at one point, but again, there may not be as need for as much of it as we're used to today, where vehicles cost so much and bread costs so much. But I think as we move into these other universal energy dimensions, that the money will, in a way, sort of fall off over time, but we'll still use money, as he said, until the man gets the greed out of his structure. But it will be less and less, I think, as we know, if you can create your own shelter or environment to live, magnetical gravitational fields, and collapse it when you're ready to move, why would you have to buy a house and get a mortgage and pay for that house 3 times over 20 or 30 years? So I think it's going to apply across the board. That the governments will get relief, and from that relief, they can provide what the citizens need. Because we have hunger right here in the United States, much more than we're aware of, I think.
Yeah, and we're supposedly first world.
Supposedly. But with the technology, as he said, the East will now enjoy the luxuries of the West. And that's fine with me. I always thought there should be no reason that I live any better than anyone else on this planet. And I think with this technology, it's going to make it happen. And then, of course, if you're not happy here, you can change your map location perhaps to go out into the universe and find a new location or create your own solar system and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, coming up, but we're only in the initial stages, but it is looking quite positive at this point.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, though, Mark, and this is one of
Yeah.
the things. In many ways, we received some good news, but that good news this week, uh, it wasn't a fluke. That there were machinations in the background, that made it happen. So, again, if we understand that what was in the background manifested what's in the foreground, then why are we having difficulty understanding with the plasma state and the physical state and the relationship there? So, what the plasma state is doing in the background is establishing a form pattern for the physical state. So whatever we're seeing in the physical state is a product, is a result of. So we have to change that thinking. We have to incorporate it. And for the younger crowd, it's very easy. I'm part of the older crowd, and I'm having an enormous amount of difficulty, even though I've done this for many, many years. And part of the problem if you will, is that it doesn't seem to be a precedent in terms of the physicality. So everything is derived from the plasma state. And the physicality doesn't have a precedent of that either. So it's all novel. So the plasma experience is a novel experience, the physical experience, then in that context is also a novel experience. And so the experience uh, part of the equation, if you will, also changes. It was one of the early lessons that I got, the difference between belief and experience. And so you experience your beliefs, or do you believe your experience? So it's raining, and you say it's a lousy day. So is that your belief or is that your experience? When a farmer looks and it's a rainy day and he says, "Oh man, this is a great day." Well, how can you have this different experience on the same day with the same condition? So it's based on belief, isn't it? Your experience is based on your belief. And that was a really harsh lesson for me because I wasn't brought up that way. I believed in the system, especially the professional system, the academics, the lawyers, the accountants, the doctors, the ones with the initials behind their name, the PhDs. I always looked up to them. They would strive for knowledge and then achieve a level. And that level was, of course, higher than my level. So it was something that I would idolize or wish to obtain or suffer for having failed to obtain. And then I realized, well, that's just a point of view, isn't it? Was I lacking in my life as a result of not having initials behind my name? Or were there other reasons? And as soon as I changed my belief, then my life changed. So I found in that quarrel between belief and experience that there were a lot of ingrained, shall we say, conditions that, triggered. So, let's look at an extreme case. You had a business and it failed. You went bankrupt. That's a tragedy. You had a business which was a yoke around your neck and it was weighing you down. Well, it's a blessing. So you get to choose how you want to look at it. Is it a tragedy or is it a blessing? Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I think we're all going to go in the business of serving one another until there's no one left to serve on this planet. So there'll be plenty of opportunity to do your work, let's say, and to elevate the others. Whether it's through teaching or other methods, there's going to be a place for everyone to serve. So this will be our next move in a way, that we start serving one another rather than trying to take from one another, or the boss not paying you enough so they can make a profit or a return on investment and the rest of this. I think we're heading in a huge paradigm shift on this planet, and the people are ready for it. They can see that in a way, the game is rigged. Many people work their entire lives and end up with almost nothing. So this is about to change. But again, it may not be in the snap of a finger, but it may be sooner than we think. And hopefully it's going to be a benefit to all of us. And teach us about what we need to know a little bit more about traveling into the universe. I'm looking forward to a tourism industry. This is very exciting. That would probably require many, many people on this planet, again, with building systems and fueling them and setting up the feeding sort of apparatus through the fields and the rest of this and everything else that we consider a luxury, I guess, when you're traveling across the universe.
Well, this is it, Mark. With the pressure that we have on deciding, do we rely on our belief or rely on our experience? And with the context of just the physicality, we try and rationalize sometimes and say, oh, it's too bad you lost your business, but look at all the free time you have now. But if we take it into context with the platform reality and understand that, there are other fields, that there are other capabilities, then you have to look at that context as well. Because if you're going to engage in those other fields, then you have to leave this field. So then the notion of the ability to operate in two fields is now also on the table. And we haven't even adapted to the first belief experience decision-making process. Now we have other alternatives. So the challenges are coming fast and furious in terms of our acceptance, our understanding, and and trying to navigate through life. And how do we navigate through life when we don't know what the extent of life is and always see that little piece of the pie? And that's all it is. It's just a little piece of the pie. And we never look beyond that little piece of the pie because, we've just grown accustomed to being satisfied with that little piece. Well, if you're satisfied with a little piece, well, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want the bigger piece, well, but what do you have to do? Do you have to sell your soul? Do you have to liquidate your moral responsibilities or your moral sensibilities? Or do you adapt? And so this becomes a challenge. So it really throws a different perspective on life, and all of us have to do literally soul searching to figure it out. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, anyone else would like to raise a point or ask a question, please? We want to give everyone an opportunity.
So I think I want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present, and I hope you're enjoying this series. We, I think more than ever now we have a purpose that's manifesting in front of us, and that purpose is actually quite a nice purpose. Uh, Generally speaking, it's all about peace and prosperity. But the cherry on the cake, if you will, is engaging with the universal community. I think that is a enticing prospect that is full of all sorts of wonderful possibilities. I'm assuming wonderful possibilities, and I would prefer it to be wonderful. Thanks, Mark.
Yes, so much coordination and coordinating the people who are underfed, coordinating the people who need wellness care, amputations, and the rest. So I think there's going to be much work for all of us to do in the upcoming time as we transition. Again, we're not abandoning the matter state because we operate in that dimension. But now we're just going to be adding to man's knowledge in this energy dimension. So there's going to be so much work for all of us, and all of these groups, I sense, will be growing exponentially in the coming weeks and months and years as we continue to move into this new dimension of understanding the universal knowledge rather than man's knowledge. As I said, we're just adding to man's knowledge. We're not destroying it. Good things for, Randy says, good thing for wireless headphones. Didn't miss anything. I guess he had to step away and help someone. Thank you, Randy. Anyone else want to bring a thought, a comment, a wish, or anything like that? Yeah, things are moving quite nicely and smoothly. And I think the majority of the people on this planet of what they've seen in the last year or two, or for most of their life, is saying we need to change our structure. We need to move into a new, they don't know why, but they're certainly wishing for it. Please continue to add your energies to the energies of the Keshe Foundation team that are in the process of negotiating, as well as the leaders and the others who are also taking part, that all the sides will, in a way, negotiate from a point of wisdom and peace, rather than how much I can take from your structure or how much you can take from my structure, but it'll become one structure where we're all in a way like a big fountain, just adding that water going up and creating a beautiful fountain for everyone to feed and to partake in. It'll be a continuous flow. So again, I don't even think we're even fully aware of what's in the background of the Keshe Foundation and what's going to be coming forward, really as a gift from the creator in so many ways. I don't think any of us have developed a system that generates the energy that runs the creator or anything like this. So we're in a supportive role in the background, but I think we'll be coming into the foreground and sharing the knowledge as we understand it, the same way Alex does or any of the other knowledge seekers. And of course, we're all sharing what we think we understand about this knowledge usually when I meet someone, or if I see an opening to sort of crack into this plasma technology, I start talking about it a little bit and then give them where to go if they want to understand more. That's all. We're not forcing, but we're sort of transferring some beautiful knowledge to others if they're open to it, if they want to pick up that flower. And no one is forced into this understanding. It's all based on the way you want to go with it. So thank you all for being here today and being part of this huge change for humanity. I'm sure you'll be thanked profusely in the future if you're recognized as one of them. You don't have to be. Or maybe if you get thanked in this dimension, then that is in a way, the level of you've received in the matter state. But if you stay quiet in the background and just do your work, and then of course it'll be recognized throughout the universe rather than just on this planet. So we all have a beautiful future to look forward to. And again, it will be delivered as promised. And they're just like there's a few little things they have to do to those boxes with the cosmic ray material. There's still a few touches, or maybe a number of more touches that need to be added on. But once the leading countries get on board with this, it's just going to naturally filter. And a lot of this will be coming out of Iran, surprisingly enough. The nation in the West that's been, they keep telling us we need to have a war with them and attack them, or the Chinese. Now, this is all going to go by the wayside, hopefully, or we will be able to divert any sort of wrong intentions by other nations. So there's much to do. Even the strategic defense of the Earth, as Mr. Keshe said, that's what that star formation was made for. And of course, we have asteroids and other things that we can't even see because they're in the dimension of plasma. It's only when they hit the fields of this Earth and the inertia that they manifest as a solid rock. So we have a lot of work to do protecting the Earth, creating these domes over nations. And what we've seen in so many other places, this will all start to come to an end. Slowly, step by step, and hopefully quicker. But again, we all are in a rush, or we want to see it happen now, but there's a reason for it to be. So other things can move into the correct position, as I understand it. So thank you all for carrying a very small part of this very large carpet. Anyone else, please? And of course, just a reminder to join us every day, using your energies as a beautiful field bouquet in a way, joining with the others, and then extend that as often, as much as you'd like to extend it, to bring the change through the energy dimension rather than the physicality. This is the dimension we'll be working with, I think, more and more in space, although there will be a whole fleet, I think, of craft that'll enter into this exploring space in the what we would call the matter state, and this tourism and the rest of this. But I think it's the energy dimension which we really want to hold on to. The physicality we don't really need. But we certainly need to understand the interaction of the fields on the energy state, because this is how we gain an aspect of immortality, by playing one off against the other. And of course, there's this whole, I don't know if they'll have a consultation for religious leaders in this plasma ministry, Alex, but they may come in, and if they have any sort of nervous breakdowns, we can help them with that and rebalance their system. But I think a lot of them, not at the lower levels, but at the higher levels, are very well understanding what is about to happen on this planet and what's been promised. At least that's my understanding. So it won't be foreign to them, and hopefully they'll, as we saw with the leader in Iran, that he's decided to move into that direction, perhaps take off the frock and so on. But yet there's still more to unravel, I think, and what events will take place and what obstacles may be put in the way. But again, they'll just be summarily removed, as I understand it, eventually in a timely manner. And people will move more and more into this dimension, or this understanding of their capacities and capabilities as a entity made in the image of the creator, as he's made the entire universe in his image.